if you if you're going to use most of the methods that are available, once you decide you're going to become conscious, the traditional methods, work with getting your body straight, your heart open, your mind calm, and they use meditation, raising energy, mantra, purifications of various sorts, chanting, and all of the techniques, most of these techniques, in some way or other, some subtle way, use your senses to go beyond your senses. And that's what Tantra is really about. And sexual Tantra is using the sexual experience as a way to transcend. It's a vehicle, it's a means, it's an upaya or method. Now, you don't enter into it lightly. Most of the people that say, I am using sex as a method of getting high, are just sort of, there's a beautiful cop-out, very subtle place where they're copping out. And that's all cool, because that's where we're at this moment. And I don't think you should put yourself down for wherever you are, because I find that's too heavy, at least to lay on myself, you know. So, but a lot of us are getting ready now to try to take something like our sexual world and bring it into consciousness. And what you have to understand is that when you are going to enter into a sexual trip with a partner, you are deciding that you are going to be a two-person expedition into consciousness. You're taking on a partner in your journey to consciousness, and you can't start with a partner and then say, well, I got to do it myself at this point, because you make the contract, we only get as far as we both get together. And so that, like, a lot of guys come to me and they say, sex doesn't mean much to me anymore, but my wife still wants it. And I say, well, man, then you might as well satisfy her, because you and she are a traveling team, and that means part of us still needs sex at that level, you know, before we can transmute it enough. Now, when a couple finally decides they are consciously a journeying pair together, then the first thing is they have to get really totally straight with one another, because the act of using sex as a vehicle for consciousness does not start from separateness to bring together. It starts from togetherness. That's where it begins from. And that means being that honest and straight with one another, so that the couple can start to just, I mean, I can set up the rules that are so fierce, but some people that are listening are really ready to do this, of just sitting down with your partner and looking into their eyes and starting in where one works for a while and then the other, and just the simple question, if there is anything you can think, feel, desire, fear, or imagine that is difficult, embarrassing, or uncomfortable to share with me, share it. In other words, it is not possible that you can have any closed doors in your head in relation to me if we are going to work together in consciousness. We've got to be right here together. Because every place you have in your head that you think, I can't let her know or him know, that is keeping them as object. And that is the place where you're going to get paranoid again. It's always that place. So all of the doors in Hermann Hesse's Magic Theater have to be opened between you, you see. And as you keep doing that, you keep getting higher and higher until you're inside each other's heads. See? And then you start to share consciousness right at the beginning. When you've gotten to this place where we are, then through the bodies coming together, the physiological process starts, which isn't led by mind tripping. See, most people do mind sex. There's a way of saying it, but I don't think it's appropriate over here.
Thank heavens.
There is a way of having sex with your mind, where most people lead with their fantasies. In fact, most of the time they're making love to their fantasy projections. You know, there's really nobody out there as far as they know. But when you've done this, where there's one consciousness, and then these bodies start to do this dance, the whole dance is true physiological arousal, and you just feel like you're carried along on the wave, so that the orgasm starts from the moment It's like this long, long, long foreplay, except it's all involuntary. It's just the beautiful dance of nature in your bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Except there's two bodies and one consciousness, and we're always right here, and here we are, see? And it's like, you can keep whispering in our ear, here we are, you know, like, here we are, wow, like this, here we are, you know? Because instead of going into your separate experiencing thing, you've already joined consciousness. See? It's really a high experience. I mean, that's what they talk about tantric sex going on for hours and hours and hours, because the orgasm ceases to be the goal. See, because the whole process is so high that it all is enough. And in fact, in a lot of work on oneself, for a man anyway, not ejaculating is a very useful thing, actually, rather to take the energy and move it up your spine, you see. So by adopting certain positions, for example, where the man sits and the woman sits astride the man, called the Matuna position, you get into a position where the man can remain in the woman and may remain erect and so on for long periods of time without ejaculating. And when that goes on, you have this process where it just stays at a very, very high place. And the whole business of working towards orgasm ceases to become the dominant theme. It's just a dance done with one consciousness and two bodies. It's just a very highly ecstatic dance. And I think a lot of people are really now starting to learn about all that as they get out of the playboy model of sex.
How do you like people to refer to you? I don't know whether to call
Ramdas.
Ramdas.
Yeah.
What does Baba Ramdas mean, by the way?
Ram is one of the incarnations of God, of Vishnu, and Das means servant, so it means servant of Ram. And Baba is a title, one of the translations means grandfather, but it also is a title given to Vaishnavite holy men in India. And most holy men are called Baba anyway, even if they're Swamis. Swamis are Shaivites usually. But Baba is an overriding term, so that when you walk down the street, if you're dressed in holy clothes in India, they'll say, hey, Babaji, and Ji means just the sort of endearing term of Baba. What I understand is that to experience the horror of it, we all can tune in on the level at which there is the horror. To experience the horror doesn't necessarily help. Because the interesting question is, what can I do as a human being to increase the consciousness, identity with love, identity with beauty, identity with truth for all of my fellow men, for all of us together, since we all got to make it together, because we can't make it separately, because we're living in a psychic space together. And when I look at that, I understand that all I can do as a separate entity is to do whatever I do as consciously as I can. That's the rule of the game, you see. Because the sitting around being horrified doesn't, all that does is I'm lost in the dance of the horror, and I'm by my thought forms, I'm adding energy into that particular thing. Because in the game of polarities, the poles just keep getting more and more apart, the paranoia gets higher, and the goal which every human being has, which is to be at home in love, where it feels really good, everybody gets further and further removed. And so you've got to look very carefully at whether your method of getting rid of the devil isn't making an alliance with the devil, see, in a new and more subtle form. And in a way, the whole trip of polarities is not conscious enough. It doesn't mean, however, that you don't protest against impurities in a social system. The question is how conscious you are when you protest. And it boils down to this. I mean, I can make the statement as bodily as this. When you can love the being you are protesting against as much as yourself, then you can protest in a conscious way. Because what it's saying is, just like we were talking about making love, it's exactly the same situation. When we can meet, it's like two English tennis players. See, and they meet, and they're in the middle of the set point of the big match, and it's a fierce match, fierce being an English word, and they look at each other and they say, jolly good day, isn't it? You know, and at some moment, they've jumped levels, they've gone behind the way in which they're competitors in order to meet at a place. It's like, I was in Washington a number of years ago, and at that time I was kind of a heavy pusher in acid, and I was sort of connected with the underground in one way or another. And I met with one of the heads of the Food and Drug Administration. We just happened to meet in a hotel lobby. See? And I knew he had a big dossier on me, and he knew I had a big dossier on him, and we sat on this couch in the lobby, and we really liked each other, see? And we were in this... And at the end, he said, Richard, I just hope you don't do anything illegal, because you're a really nice guy, and I'd hate to have to bust you.
Huh.
And I realized that we had met at a place behind our game.
I see.
Now, the thing is that a lot of our protests can do exactly what they want to do, which is to protest against the hurt in all of us, the feeling of frustration, the feeling of agony at seeing our own horror, at seeing what man's mind can create in the way of paranoia and in the way of destruction of the environment. Now, to come at it from a slightly different angle, take our ecological concerns. See, what's exquisite about that, a lot of people say, well, that's a ploy to get us away from the real issues, see. But in fact, that's a reflection of the fact that we are moving to a higher level of consciousness. Because the predicament is that Florence Kluckhohn, the Harvard anthropologist, used to differentiate societies into man over nature, man in nature, and man under nature. And you could take all societies and see whether they were primarily oriented. Like ours is primarily a man over nature. It's the rational mind. We can control our environment and ergo our destinies. But it becomes apparent that there are so many variables you just can't control them, no matter how exquisite your computer or anything. Because you can see how the government just can't handle the complexity of the scene that is what a modern technological society is all about. So what happens is, as man begins to be aware of the finiteness of his own rational mind, that he can only push a linear computer just so far, see, he starts to flip into another place. And he flips into a place, let's see how to describe it. He flips out of using the rational mind into another space where he intuits, or he lives in, I gotta move slowly through here now. He is forced into the next level of consciousness, which you can equate to the chakras or the energy centers, and say that he moved from man over nature to man in nature, or a harmonious relation to the forces around him, seeing himself as merely part of nature, as I was talking about before.
I see.
And once he does that, then the whole ecological trip makes perfect sense to him. So he's got to honor nature. He's part of it. Then he's living by the book of Tao, the Tao Te Ching. And that is the same thing as moving from the third to the fourth chakra, moving into the heart chakra, which is compassion, Buddhist compassion. See, because the compassionate activist is somebody who is aware of the predicament we're all in, and he doesn't get into the black hats and the white hats, there are the good guys and the bad guys. He realizes that we are all human beings really trying to make it, except that each of us is caught in his particular way of doing it, and we're killing each other over our ways of doing it. Even though we all share the goal. And once you move to the next level and you're aware of the shared goal, when we meet with the goodwill that we honor the fact that we all have a goal, which is to come to the light, to come into love, because no matter how much a guy is an egomaniac, he's still doing all that even, just in order to come to a certain feeling inside of himself. A conscious person is beyond the law. Which means, and that is true, you are beyond good and evil, but by the same token, you are in a place where you can only perform good. because you understand good meaning that which brings man out of the illusion into the next plane of consciousness, into unity. Bad being that which increases paranoia or illusion. So if I kill, steal, exploit, lust after, see, it's like the whole Ten Commandments are right hanging by. There they all are. But you don't do them because somebody said, you follow the Ten Commandments. You do them because there's nothing else to do. Because if I screw you so you get more paranoid at me, we both lose. See? And once you realize that, you can't perform an act which increases paranoia. We are moving into another psychic space, which is the psychic space of the immediate present, the eternal present, the here and now. Television, transportation, technology, drugs, everything took us McLuhan-esque way, into the here and now. The here and now is another energy place where there's a fantastic amount more energy available to every human being in the system. Now the question is, do we run that new energy through the old models of Get Daddy, see? Because I meet a lot of the revolutionaries, and man, I don't want to work under them, because when they become Big Daddy, man, they're going to be as bad as the last Big Daddy.
Sure.
And a lot of the kids are beginning to dig that, you see, that they're not selling one system for a higher consciousness. It's an old, that revolution and evolution are two different things. That you can have a revolution that is quite conscious and part of evolution, or you can have a revolution which is just the opposite. And what I dig now is that depending on how the revolutionary got into the revolution, he's either getting finished with it and realizing now we're all on this planet and it's just one round ball and here we all are, so we might as well get on with it, man, because if we're going to sit around beating each other up, nobody wins. Nobody possibly wins. And I'm delighted because as I drift around the country, drift around the Western world, everywhere I go, there's this fantastic amount of consciousness emerging. And the minute other models are available for how to use energy, it's like you take a society that's used to a 40-hour work week and you cut them down to a 30-hour work week. What do they do with the extra 10 hours? They do leisure time things harder and harder, you see, until you give guaranteed annual wage, until nobody's got anything to do, and yet we're still running supposedly under the Protestant ethic where you got to work to be good, but there's no work to do, see? And then you get into this funny breakdown where nobody's working and then you're evil, see? And it's very delicate to redefine the nature of man's life experience. So all we have to do is be here and it's enough. See, that's what be-ins were about. You, man, be in. Be here, a human being. See? And let's just be here together. And more and more I suspect, well, I won't say, what I feel is that the two forces, the force towards the nivritti and the prakriti, the force towards fragmentation and towards paranoia and towards separateness increases in a geometrical rate. At the same time, the force towards unity, which is called the spiritual liberation front, or the force towards light, goes at that rate. And they both go at exactly the same rate, which is very far out, you see. And in the Hindu system, there is a point where Shiva's been sitting in meditation on the top of Mount Kailash, or wherever one of the 4 mountains he sits on. And he's really just stoned out in highest samadhi, you see. And then after after all of the yugas that make up one kalpa, which is a time so long that it boggles the mind, he yawns, comes out, and gets up and dances. And that's called the pralaya. And it's when it all ends, you see. And I get to the point where I see that the flash of the hydrogen bomb and the white light of enlightenment get awful close together to me, you see, because a realized being says, one to me is loss and gain, one to me is fame and shame, one to me is pleasure and pain, one to me is life and death. Okay? You get very far out where you begin to see that these forces come together at a certain point. It's really scary because where they come together, you can't conceive of how it is because it's beyond form. Okay? And whether we're going to do it in the horrible trip or the beautiful trip, we're going to get there anyway. You see, that's what's really far out. Everybody's ready now for a truly straight message. And if a revolutionary can make his message straight enough and pure enough and honest enough so there's no shuck and there's no power play and there's no ego play, everybody will hear it. And if it isn't, if there's one false note, everybody knows. So there's nothing we can do but work on ourselves. I love you all.
Good night.
Govinda